Okay, this video is on chapter 12, which is mostly about forest as well as some protected areas. Okay. So the first thing that you need to make sure that you know about is the layers of a forest. Okay, so this figure over here, there's a lot of words that they like to mention, so make sure that you know that the canopy is the top, that the forest floor is at the bottom. Make sure that you know that your snags and your fallen logs, what they do. These are the ones that can cause problems, that can catch on fire easier. So just make sure you review this and read the section about the layers of the forest. Okay, now, forests, they provide us a lot of ecosystem services. Make sure that you review this figure and caption of all the different services that forests provide us and the reason why we want to preserve them and protect them. As you can see, they do a lot of different things for us. Big thing to also make sure that you know, forests help mitigate and prevent climate change, all right? As it says up here, they remove CO2 from the atmosphere and they actually store the carbon and produce oxygen. So this is part of the reason why they help with climate change. They also provide us with a lot of economic benefits besides fuel and wood. So as you can see here, there's one, but they also provide us with recreation, health possibility, and other things. So make sure that you review that. All right. Now, deforestation. Why do we care about it? Well, it causes soil degradation through erosion. So when you chop down all of these trees and remove their roots, now the soil isn't held intact by the roots. It also can cause species extinction because now their homes and their habitats are destroyed, biodiversity is lost, and it adds CO2 to the atmosphere, which causes global warming. So not only by just cutting down the trees that has CO2 being removed less from the atmosphere, a lot of the times when they remove trees through deforestation, they burn them, so we're actually even adding extra CO2 to the atmosphere. Deforestation can also collapse a civilization. Think about Easter Island. And we've also found that when you cut down trees and remove their roots, they actually increase the temperature in streams and soil. And we actually have a lot less groundwater because now the tree roots are not holding the water in place. Forest loss. So this is pretty interesting. So this is a primary forest from 1620, which we'll talk about more what that means. And as you can see here today, there's not much of primary forest left, the dark green. It's all secondary forests. And if you can see here, most of the East Coast is all secondary, and that's because we destroyed it all when we first came to this country. Now, what a primary forest is, it's also known as an old growth forest. That means it's never been logged, it has the most biodiversity, and it's usually a crucial habitat for endangered species like the spotted owl. Okay. This figure and caption is pretty interesting. For once, the United States is doing something good. A lot of the forests in the United States and Europe, we're actually regrowing it because currently, at least in the United States, the law is that for everything you cut down, you must replant. However, other continents like South America and Africa and Indonesia, they are not replanting the forests that they're cutting down. And a lot of things in the news now is that a lot of these countries are legitimately destroying their forests and their tropical rainforests to make more land for farms, unfortunately. So they're having much greater loss. Okay, this figure here. It's all about the maximum sustainable yield, and basically your specialists, your fisheries managers, your forest rangers and managers, they have figured out almost like what the maximum sustainable yield is for amount of trees that can be logged, the amount of fish that can be caught and removed. So make sure that you review this. It looks very similar. It is your S-shaped curve. Okay. All right, if you look here on this figure, you can see that most of the public owned land is out in the west, and that's because a lot of this didn't even start until everything on the East Coast was for the most part privately owned. So that's the reason why majority of our national parks, Forest Service, things are all owned on the West Coast and Alaska. And that's just because we didn't travel out there and venture there early enough. Okay, the U.S. National Forest Service, they manage the use of land. So they determine what's blocked, what kind of recreation happens there. And Gifford Pashat was the one who started that, and we learned about him in the video that we watched in class. Okay, a plantation forest, that's kind of what's going on here. These are all pine trees, and the reason why pine trees are planted is because they're the most economical and beneficial for a plantation owner to plant. The problem with plantation forests is that they're usually monocultures. They're even aged, so they're all the same age, which then leads to less biodiversity. And these tree farms, they have less niches, so it also affects like the homes of other species. You have to make sure that you understand what clear cutting is, because this is the most popular method of logging. What happens with clear cutting is soil erodes, and that's because all the trees and the tree roots are removed. And once they're removed, now you have a lot more sun in the area, which causes change in species, because certain plant species can only live in shady regions versus sunny regions. So you change the diversity of the habitat. It is also the cheapest method, and it's also the safest method. So this is why it's the most popular method for cutting down trees. Now here, there's all the alternatives, which you guys you must know. A big popular one is your selection systems, but these can be a little dangerous and more expensive. So this is why clear cutting is the number one, but there are options. So make sure you know what those are. The National Forest Management Act, this basically determines, if you read through all the little bullets, that a managed land, it has to be multiple use, all right? It has to have recreation purposes. It has to have purposes for logging, for campers, for hikers, etc. So it has to be organized and managed so that everyone benefits from this land, not just one or the other. So that's something to make sure that you remember. Okay. Okay. All right, fires. That's a big topic. Now, there's low intensity frequent fires, and these usually clear out debris, they thin forests, they help even germinate seeds that have been like long time stuck in the soil. And these are very beneficial for the sequoia and ponderosa pines. Now, the problem with it is years of fire suppression has led to these mega fires. And basically, these mega suppression has actually caused forests to be unhealthy. So, because we're preventing Mother Nature from working, we're actually making our forests worse off and endangering them to experience these mega burns or mega fires. Now, how can we prevent that? We now have these things called prescribed or control burns, where we actually pick days to set mini little fires to help burn the debris and the brush on in forests. We also do salvage logging, and that's when the loggers go in and they take down all the dead trees, some of the smaller ones, they remove all that stuff and the debris, so that's less likely to catch on fire. And make sure you know the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. That's what this is all part of. Okay. So fun fact, there was a question about the East Coast problem with the mountain pine beetles. So you see in this picture, it still looks like if these trees are in fall when it's actually not. And that is because the, excuse me, the mountain pine beetles, they kill most of the trees in a warmer climate. So once it gets warmer, they go in and then the trees basically look permanently dead or permanently stuck in the fall. So just make sure that you understand what the mountain pine beetles do. All right. These pages talk about the sustainable forest certifications. Make sure that you know sustainable forestry examples, and how the certification programs work. Okay. All those little bullets. All right, national parks. National parks are set aside for public to enjoy. So in national parks, you're not allowed to take anything. If you go fishing, it's catch and release. You're not allowed to chop anything down. You literally go in and you come out with what you took with you. The first one was the Yellowstone National Park, and all national parks have to be declared by Congress to be a national park. Now, the Antiquities Act, this is the one where national monuments can be created, and a fun fact is Congress does not need to be involved with a national monument, so this is when the president can come in and say, you know what, I want to preserve this small little spot, I'm going to make it a national monument, and so then it can be protected. National Wildlife Refuge, and then you have your wilderness area. Now, wilderness areas are pretty cool. They're undeveloped areas of land. There's no roads. You have to backpack or hike in. There's no facilities. You literally go in and come out. There's nothing for you to use or to remove. So it really is nature preserved, is your wilderness areas. Okay. Make sure you know what the land trust is. This is basically nature's conservatories. Make sure you know what a biosphere reserve, World Heritage Sites, and UNESCO. Basically, they decide and manage World Heritage Sites. So these are all over the world. So these are just other ways that we protect land. And some of these don't necessarily have to be forests. They can be cities, or small little towns or historic places that UNESCO works with to try and preserve. Okay, habitat fragmentation, we've talked about this before, but make sure you review that. Deforestation really causes habitat fragmentation to occur. And there has been a test question once in the past about the cowbirds, so just make sure that you review that little segment about them. Okay. Island biogeography theory. We did a lab with this in class. Remember that the closer and larger the island is, the more diversity you have. The farther and smaller it is, the less diversity you have, and that's because of immigration problems. National parks are actually habitat islands as well. They experience similar results because they're either really far away from other parks, so then the diversity changes, or they're really near other parks, so then they're able to have higher diversity because the organisms have different safe havens to travel to and from. So just make sure that you know the connection between those two. Okay. The last thing that you have to make sure you know about is the Sloss dilemma, which if you look here, it's single, large, or several small. It's just trying to figure out, because of habitat fragmentation, we have to decide, is it better to have reserved like gigantic large places, or have a few and only have a few of them, or should we have multiple small little places, and which is the best? So just make sure you review this figure and statement about that. And that is it for chapter 13.